Today I'm going to show you how to do a pantograph using the Juki TL-2200QVP. I have my quilt already loaded. I have my pantograph that I'm going to use loaded, and it's just laying right across the table. I cover my pantograph, that's a paper pantograph, with a piece of vinyl that just goes right over the top. You can see here I have a dry erase pen, and I just have this piece of paper that I use as a straight edge because I don't care if it gets marker on it. The first thing you're going to do once your quilt's loaded and you're ready to go, everything's threaded, you've checked your tension, you can see here that I have my needle going right down there at the corner point of the top of the quilt. So drop your needle, then with the laser on the back, here's my laser right here. And if you're wondering what the blue tape is on the end, I just taped it and poked a smaller hole so I have a finer red line to follow. You want to move your laser light around. It's hard to see, it's right there. You want to move it around until it is at the very bottom of your pattern. About there. I'm not super happy with that because it's hitting the metal line, so I'm going to move it slightly. At this point, this is where this line here is where the edge of your quilting will be, so you can decide if that's the point on the pattern you like. If not, shift it or move the laser slightly. Then you are going to mark with your dry erase marker over the top of the vinyl piece. Mark a straight line top to bottom, and I'm going to pause a moment while I do that. Okay, so we're back. I have my vertical line marked on my pantograph on the vinyl, so I'm not actually marking on the paper pantograph because I want to be able to use it again for different quilts. So this is one where you could see, oh, I don't like how it lines up. You can shift your paper back and forth if you needed to. You don't have to. But once you have that, you're going to lift your needle up, move your machine to the other end of your quilt. You're going to come right up here and drop the needle at the top corner of your fabric. Then you can see I have a line here, and again I'm going to go ahead and mark a vertical line here, and we will be back. Alright, so I have marked the new line on the paper, on the vinyl. In case you're wondering, the pattern I am using is called Loophole, and it is available from Urban Elements. So I have my other line marked. Now I'm ready to quilt. It's up to you which side, if you want to work from your left to right as you're standing at the back of the machine, or if you want to go from right to left, it doesn't really matter. My first line, I always use this thinner registration, whatever the edge of the pantograph has, I always put that as my first one. I think you get a better result when you do that. You don't have gaps at the top of your quilt when you're finished. Nobody wants gaps. So you go ahead and quilt it, and then I will catch up with you after I quilt the first row. Okay, so you can see I have my first little partial row quilted here all the way across. And now what we need to decide is if I can do that next row on my pattern, the one that's the darker black color here, if I can fit that in my throat space. So the way you do that is to just simply make sure you cut your thread and your needle is up. Make sure you then move up to where the laser is at the highest point of the pattern, and it looks like I am good here. Here's my highest point of my pattern. I still have a good couple inches before I run up into that belly bar. So move along, you can double check a couple spots if you want to. Here I'm at the highest point of the pattern again. I still have plenty of space, so I'm going to go ahead and quilt my second row, and then after that I will show you how to advance the fabric. Alright, I have the first full row quilted onto the pattern, so now I need to advance the fabric. And the way that I do that is I move my machine I usually go to the left as much as I can just because it's easier for me to walk around in my room on that side. You want to choose a point that's easy to line up, so sometimes I might go with this high point here, or if it's a little more difficult to line up, I'd go with the point that's near the high point. And basically what we're gonna do is roll the fabric until that line is down. If I use that intersection point right here, then I want to scroll my fabric so that my laser is approximately to here. So that is what I do. I put my needle down, so I make sure that on this point I have my needle down right in that intersection. That was this intersection that I talked about. I'm gonna scroll down till I hit to here. Okay, I have advanced my fabric to the point of where I was approximately at that intersection. You can see that my laser is a little bit low, but that's all right. My needle is still down in the fabric, and this point is where my rollers happen to click to ratchet into place. So all you will do is get your row, so you get your front of your quilt ready to go, and then you will just move your laser to be at that, to be right at that intersection. And then you should be ready to go. So make sure you have your pin grip things back on the sides to hold the sides. You can see I use the clip that came with the machine, and then I have this quilted piece that's about 8 inches long, and I pinned this to the edge of my quilt here to hold my sides taut. So I will get ready here and then we'll talk about what to do next. Right, before we move on a little bit, I just want to say make sure that when you are advancing your quilt, you have loosened both the top and the bottom bars. Leave the total top one here, make sure that one's still tight and clicking as you roll. Get your quilt realigned, whatever you need to do with it, then make sure you retighten these so that you keep your good tension on your machine. You can see right here that my needle is still in that point like I had on my pantograph back there. So I should be good to go. One thing you can do to make sure that you are lined up with everything is just do a little visual check. So I'm gonna lift my needle up. I'm gonna scroll along to this next point right here. That was from my previous row. Drop my needle, and it looks like, yes, I am in the same position as I was, so my alignment looks good so far. You can keep doing that all the way across the quilt. I'm gonna go over a few more. Let's put it in right here. Yeah, I'm pretty close to where I was. So it's still lined up. I'm a slight bit off, which happens when you're doing a pantograph. The important thing with a pantograph is to make sure that you're moving in a consistent, even manner. You don't want to go really slow, then really fast. If you don't hit the line, it's all right. As long as you're going consistently and making a smooth line, it'll look like it lines up when you're done. And I should also say, I can show you my settings right here. I'm using 10 stitches per inch. I stop my needle in the needle down position so that if I need to pause along the way, I can and double check things. I'm using cruise. That's a good one to use when you're doing a pantograph. Right now I've got my motor set at 30%. I've done it at 10%, whatever speed feels comfortable for you. That's what you should use. All right, let's continue on. As you advance your pantograph, sometimes the sides will draw, and it just depends on the pattern, how close you are. You can see right now I have my needle pretty close to the outside border of the quilt. And you can see that it's about a good ½ inch off of where I started. That's all right. I just restart there, know that I can stop a little sooner. This red line here is meant to show you where the edge of your quilt is. It won't necessarily always be exact. I find it's usually within an inch on each side, usually a little closer than that. It just depends on how much the quilt draws in, how it was pieced. Sometimes it's just the fabric of the batting, I don't know. But that's just a guide to show you kind of where the edge of the pattern is. As long as you're keeping your points along here lined up correctly, your pattern will turn out fine and look great. Okay, while you're quilting along, you're not sure how things are looking, you want to check your tension, or you think your bobbin's getting low or whatever, you need to stop in the middle of the pantograph. The best place to stop is usually in an intersection. This design is mostly curves, but I stopped that right there. You don't want to start or stop in the middle of a curve because it will show when your machine kind of jerks when it gets started, so it's easier to hide it if it's in an intersection. Okay, so I just had to do a little bit of ripping on this because I had a ruffle in my fabric. I hadn't been stitching down the edges of the quilt on this one. Usually if you're using this cup foot, it's awesome. It goes over seams, it doesn't flip the edges, so I usually don't do it unless I have to. However, this one, you can see it had a little pucker here, and this was all bunched up right here. So I ripped it out, You can kind of see where it was. What I did is I went back to a point right in the seam because I find it kind of hides if you have to start a new thread there. Otherwise, you know, you want to do it closer to a point rather than in a curve because the curve is harder to line up again. The point's easier. These little tweezers here, I think I got them at Joann. These are great for when you have to grab that little thread to pull up your bobbin thread, because you know, if you use the thread cutter on the Juki, it leaves you this little tiny little bit, and these little tweezers have this super sharp point here, and they're great at gripping that little thread and pulling your thread. So here's my thread ends. I already tied in my other thread ends, and to do that, I buried those in. I use this needle. It's kind of hard to see, but it is one of those easy threader ones. You can see the end looks like it's kind of square. It's really easy to snap the ends of your thread into that needle and then just pull them through into the batting. So now I'm gonna go back and try to fix my pattern without the ruffle. If you notice you have a bit of a ruffly border, it's always great to go from the bottom of your frame up to kind of ease that excess fabric up instead of down. If you do it down at the end, you're gonna end up with a great big wrinkly mess, and it's easier to hide in and ease in if you go from the top, or from the bottom to the top rather than pushing it to the bottom at the end. All right, I'm gonna go back to quilting this and then we'll pick up again later. So I have reached the bottom of the quilt. As you can see, I'm going to need to take off these leader grips here and baste the bottom of the quilt before I determine how to place my last piece of the pattern. When I do that, I baste from the center to each side. And then after I get that done, we'll come back and I'll show you how to go ahead and mark your pattern to quilt out the last row. You can see I have that whole bottom edge basted down, and I've basted up the sides as well. And I don't really have enough room to make my entire pattern. So what I'm going to do is, here you can see my laser's at the last row on the high point. You can see where that is here, and I have about 4 inches or so to go. So I'm going to move my machine up to the edge of the fabric and just drop my needle. You can see on here that I don't need to quilt that entire row. So I'm just going to draw just a loose guideline across there with my marker so I know where to start and stop. I'll move my machine down a bit more along that border, drop the needle, then continue on drawing that line towards that dot, and I'm going to move across the entire quilt that way. Once I have that, when I start quilting, if I start at this back left side, start here, trace, stop a little bit beyond there, go over, come back up, drift back over to this line, come around, go up. I'd probably just quilt that whole one, keep going. And you can also see that my line is going to go into this last placement row right here. So I will need to go back and quilt those little loops at the end too to fill in those empty spaces, and that's all there is to it.